This work session for the Borough Council for the Borough of Gettysburg for Monday, June 23rd, 2025, 7 p.m. We have some empty chairs tonight. Don't fret. We've got a member who's under the weather. Someone's on vacation. The manager's dealing with some family business. Ms. Lawson is on the phone with us here tonight. And the mayor and Officer in Charge Sergeant Evans tonight are over in Harrisburg attending the graduation of our latest cadet from the academy, and he'll be starting his field training here in the coming days. An executive session of the Borough Council was conducted immediately following the adjournment of the June 9th, 2025 Borough Council General Business Meeting, consistent with Section 708A1 and Section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act. An executive session will be conducted by the Borough Council immediately following the adjournment of this evening's monthly work session public meeting, consistent with Section 708A1 and Section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act for the following purposes. 1. To provide information and to discuss matters involving the employment, appointment, the terms of conditions of employment of current or prospective borough employees, and 2. To review and discuss matters of borough business, which, if conducted in public, could lead to the disclosure of information or matters of confidentiality protected by law. We're going to start this evening. Before we get to public comment, we have a special presentation. I would like to welcome to the podium Jennifer Kruger-Keeby from Mayor Duzel. This is the firm that the borough has secured the services of to help us with our annual audits, and she's here to make a presentation on the fiscal year 24.
Okay, good evening. Thank you, everyone. So just going to provide high-level overview of the borough's audited report as well as, and then I'll go into presentation of the Stormwater Authority quickly as well. So we have what's called a communication to those charged with governance, and that's a letter that we issue every year. So that provides an outline of all of our communications that we have to have with council and management every year. And with that letter, we talk about that we've audited the 2024 modified cash basis DCED report and have issued an opinion on it. And our responsibility is to express an opinion on about whether the DCED report is prepared properly in accordance with the regulatory basis of accounting in the instructions of the DCED report. And our audit of the schedules does not relieve council or management of their responsibilities. And management is responsible for selection and use of appropriate accounting policies. The significant accounting policies used by the borough were in accordance with the regulatory basis, those DCED reporting instructions. And there were no significant changes to the previous year. So there's no new policies that took place during 2024. There were no transactions entered into during a year where there was a lack of authoritative guidance or consensus. All significant transactions have been recognized properly within the DCED report. There are no sensitive estimates that we have to bring to your attention. The schedules were prepared without footnote disclosures as permitted by the DCED. We encountered no significant difficulties in performing our audit procedures. We're able to perform everything that we needed in order to issue the report. We did identify we proposed 2 material adjustments as part of our audit, and those are included more in detail in the management letter. We've recorded a contribution, just one side of the entry, essentially on an accounting world for stormwater reimbursements, as well as to correct a transfer. But the report itself was corrected, and those adjustments were reviewed by management. We did receive a management representation letter in order to issue the report. We're not aware of any consultations with other CPA firms, and the issues discussed prior to our retention as the borough auditors are a normal course or professional relationship. And we're not conditional upon us being maintained as your auditors. And as I mentioned, we did issue a separate management letter, which I'll cover a little later. So the next slide summarizes our results of the DCED audit. We issue what's called an unmodified opinion on the regulatory basis of accounting. That is the best opinion that the borough can receive for the DCED instructions. We stated that the schedules themselves were materially correct in accordance with that regulatory basis. And we also performed a compliance attestation, so similar to previous years, because the borough expended more than $750,000 of federal funding, mainly because of ARPA, using up that ARPA money. We performed additional attestation where we reviewed the allowability of spending that funding, and we issued an opinion stating that the borough did comply in accordance with the allowability in accordance with that grant agreement. The next slide just summarizes some financial highlights, and this is current year information as well as the previous 2 years. Now, the DCD report includes all of the borough funds. So in addition to your chief operating fund, your general fund also includes your special revenue, debt service, and capital projects. So as you can see, revenues did increase by about $2.7 million. However, included in that revenue amount are transfers in. So just how the borough budgets is always transfers that go from one fund to the other. So money coming into other funds from general fund or other funds that's included in transfers in. That the transfers in increased by $1.6 million, which was a large contributing factor to the increase in the revenue listed there. There was also increase in grants and contributions during the year, parking revenue, taxes, and interest revenue during the year. On the expenditure side, just like that increase in the transfers in, you see how the transfer expense increase as well by $1.6 million. There's also increases in public safety expenses, mainly attributable to capital projects that took place during the year, increases in public works, and out of those total expenditures, $566,000 was expended for your principal payments on your normal debt retirements. So at the end of 2024, the outstanding balance on your long-term debt is approximately $2.98 million. So the required payments were made in accordance with those maturity schedules. Bringing your change in fund balance, that's essentially the net income during the year, was $342,000 out of all the funds. And the next slide is a breakdown of some other financial highlights. So on the left, we talk more about all of these governmental funds. The total fund balance, that's essentially your reserves, all of your equity. So the total fund balance for all the funds is $7.7 million. However, there are certain funds that are already earmarked. They're restricted for either grant reporting or fill in a blank. So out of that $7.7 million, 26% is available for spending, and that's a majority of your general fund balance. And speaking of general fund, your chief operating fund, the change in the fund balance was $862,000, so that was a decrease from the previous year. On the right, you'll see a breakdown of the total expenditures for all your governmental funds. Large piece of the pie is the transfers out, and the second largest expense is public safety. And this slide summarizes, I mentioned that we did issue a management letter. So in addition to our audit procedures, we always gain an understanding of internal controls, procedures, and policies. And if we come across any weaknesses in internal control, we are required to report that to council and management. Because because the dollar amounts of those two proposed adjustments, we report that as a material weakness in order for recommendations on improving financial reporting. And then there was just two best practice recommendations, reconciling due to, due from. Those didn't reconcile. There were small amounts. They weren't significant enough to report as a material weakness, but we just recommended those reconciliations take place during the year. And reviewing and bank reconciliations did take place, but we just had a best practice recommendation that the reviewer initial to verify that the review took place. And then, did anybody have any questions on the borough before I hop into the Stormwater Authority? Any information I've covered or about the audit itself? No? Okay.
I was curious, can we see this online anywhere, or is it accessible online? We don't have
This,
yeah.
the audit itself or the presentation?
Both?
I don't know that we've ever posted that, but she was asking if council had any questions for her.
Apologies.
But the DCD report, it's available on through the DCD department. So any citizen can look at any of their municipalities of their DCD report. So that information is available on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania website. So moving on to the Stormwater Authority. So we also performed a separate audit for the Stormwater Authority, and we gave an independent auditor's report on modified opinions. That's the best opinion that the Stormwater Authority can receive. And in the opinion, we stated that the financial statements were presented fairly in all material respects. Just some significant changes. There was investment into plicket funds similar to the borough, so the Stormwater Authority took advantage of those good interest rates and saw, I think, about $15,000 of interest revenue during the year. So total cash and investments decreased by about $57,000. That's your net loss for the Stormwater Authority. And on the expenditure side, there was a little bit of fluctuation with operating expenditures for professional fees. There was more projects that took place, mainly the reimbursement for Washington Street project to the borough. So that was the biggest influx during the year, money going out. The footnotes to the financial statements summarize the significant policies. There were no changes during the year. The authority is a discreetly presented component unit of the borough. And there's a footnote talking about any transactions between the authority and the borough. And similar to the borough side, the authority, we also issued that required communications, all similar. So there were no significant changes that we have to bring to your attention. There were no unauthorized transactions that we're aware of, no sensitive disclosures or estimates, no difficulties as a result of our audit procedures. We did have a proposed material adjustment that was reviewed and approved by management. And there were no disagreements that we're aware of as part of our audit. And we also issue an authority DCED report, and we gave an unmodified opinion in accordance with the regulatory basis of accounting for that as well, which is the best that the authority can receive under DCED. Any questions
That's
on
great. Any
that?
questions? All right, well, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming out for it. All right. That's going to take us to our first public comment section of the evening. This first section is restricted to items appearing on tonight's agenda. They need you to use the podium. Please use the microphone. Please state your name and address of residence. And please limit yourself to 5 minutes. If you'd like to speak on a topic that's done on tonight's agenda, you can do that at the end of the meeting at the second public comment section. Is there any public comment?
Good evening. My name is Tom Pauls. I live at 26 Highland View Lane in Gettysburg. The comments I want to offer tonight are for your consideration regarding the zoning amendments that are underway. What I'm trying to hope can be accomplished is an increased clarity in the definition section of the zoning ordinance, so that those who are reading it get a better understanding of what's going on. You've heard, maybe you haven't, maybe you have, but I learned a long time ago that there's this phrase called that when it's cloudy in the pulpit, it's kind of foggy in the pews. And what we don't want to have are the citizens and other business leaders and the public in general not having a fairly good understanding of what the terminology is that's used repeatedly within the zoning ordinance. So having said that as a preface, I'd like to suggest that Chapter 27 of the zoning chapter in Part 2, which is definitions, Section 27201. I've heard the term special exception used sometimes, and a number of folks I have heard say, well, it's not special and it's not exception, it's just, it is what it is. In my basic understanding of that term, after 40 years in city planning, I'm at AICP, worked in 3 states, go on and on, but taught Old Dominion University planning for 10 years. My point is that special exceptions really are special exceptions, and it's a term of art in planning. It's a term of art in law. And because there is a term called special exception, well, what's that the distinction of? It's the distinction between what is a by right use within the various districts of the zoning ordinance. If you have a by right use, by definition, it's not a special exception use. It is something that's different. So one suggestion would be that the definition section of 27201 could say a use that is allowed other than by right and for which the zoning hearing board may grant permission, and goes on. The other term that I see is conditional use, and I understand a conditional use is a use which is allowed or denied by the Borough Council after review by the Planning Commission. And of course, the special exception is a zoning hearing board determination. But again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that conditional uses are almost synonymous with special exceptions because there is a condition applied in order for that use to be honored and to be built and approved. So this may sound drastic. My suggestion would be to delete it and use special exception in its place if you think that would be appropriate. I understand the Borough Council is the body through which conditional uses are approved, but maybe the terminology and the procedures that are established within the zoning ordinance could be modified to clarify and simplify that process. Number 3 is variance. This is a very interesting term which I have dealt with in many, many places and over many, many years. And there's certain criteria, as we all are fairly familiar with. And one is that it would create an exceptional hardship. Interestingly enough, I did not find in the definition section what exceptional hardship is. So perhaps that could be defined, and I was always told when I asked my students, if you come with a problem, then please come with an answer. Here's my suggestion as wording. Exceptional hardship, as it applies herein, absent the grant of such variance, the subject property would be deprived of any reasonable economic value. It shall be the responsibility of the property owner to demonstrate in writing that such deprivation exists. And the reason for this is that if a variance is being granted because of a hardship, that's a relative term. You know, buying a Bentley or buying a BMW is different, or buying a BMW and buying a Ford is different. But what constitutes a hardship, I think, in this case, is where that property is being denied his constitutional right to build. And I am a firm believer in the belief of property rights and the economic growth and benefits that should befall localities. But what, again, for clarity, getting back to the cloud and the fog, if you have that term defined clearly and it's understood, it can be debated as to the wording and everything. But if you have that term clearly defined, I think in a lot of ways it'll help the citizens and the business people and those people who are filing applications to make informed decisions and have an understanding what the outcome might be based on clearer language. Another one you may want to add, it's not of such a recurring nature that otherwise would justify amending the zoning ordinance. If something is being varied over and over and over again, maybe just change the zoning. Those are my comments, sir, for that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please. Yep.
Hi, my name is Natalie. I am a resident of Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, but I have an office here in Gettysburg. So I don't know if
We have your last name as well, please.
Oh, Unger, U-N-G-E-R. Unger, like hunger. So I am from Waynesboro, so I want to avoid Gettysburg turning into what Waynesboro used to be. So the last 10, 15 years, Waynesboro has revived its downtown. But before that, it was really overregulated in regards to the parking that was required. So Waynesboro had passed a regulation where one store had to have 8 parking spaces if it expected 8 people to be in its store. And because of this, a Dunkin' Donuts wanted to be next to the post office. I don't know if you've driven down Main Street, but it has a little key, like a 7-Eleven kind of thing. And that's where I wanted to be. However, because of this regulation, they were told that they would need 35 parking spaces, and therefore they moved the location to Wayne Heights, where it is today, further down on Buchanan Trail East. So my concern is that they've done research in California where towns that were not as vibrant, if they had lower regulations in parking downtown, then they were able to thrive. Those that had overregulation tended to not be as vibrant as they used to be. So Waynesboro has worked really hard to get back to where it is now, and is still continuing with a lot of work and a lot of free labor that people are doing because they care about the town. So that was one of the points that I wanted to make. So there's 3 points I wanted to make. There's 2 more. Make it easier for locals to park downtown. Locals that who work downtown aren't able to park, so it's like they have 8 hours that they have to work, and near their office, whatnot. So I think that if they have a full day to work downtown, is why punish the people who are working downtown? It would seem to be nice to have an accommodation for the people to find reasonable parking. So that's something to bring to the council. The other thing is, I understand that the peak seasons for parking in the summer. However, I don't know if you know this, but Penn State Mont Alto is closing in the next 2 years. And a lot of enrollment has been slowing down for university students. And so I know that is a lot of revenue for Gettysburg during the off season. So the summertime and like early fall is when you get a lot of like tourists and stuff like that for the historical aspect. But during the colder months, that's like where you have your students really pay for the things in town. So I wanted to say that 80% of business comes from 20% of clients. So the consistent repeat clients that you have probably during the off-peak season is from people like Gettysburg, from Chambersburg, Waynesboro, and like all the other little towns like Fairfield that come to visit here. And so if you make it harder for them to park in Gettysburg, it's less likely you're going to bring businesses here downtown. Waynesboro charges $0.25 for an hour. Greencastle charges $0.25 per hour. I know that it's pretty much to keep people accountable, and I get that, but I'm concerned that it's going to bring less business downtown area. So the other thing is one of the things that brought me here today as well was that I was hauling and unhauling to the new office space that I was moving into. And I had read the ordinance before, like a reasonable amount of time. And luckily I had a dash cam, so it showed the amount of time that I was hauling and hauling for 30 minutes. And I had gotten a ticket. And so having spoken with Becca, she was able to avoid the ticket. But I know not everyone's that lucky. And so I had emailed her recently asking about, hey, I'm going to have to haul some stuff again. I have a sign that says hauling and unhauling. I'm going to put my lights on. Is it alright if I can like park for a certain amount of time? And she was telling me that the new ordinance is going to be for 5 minutes for hauling and unhauling in regards to the bus system ordinance that you have. So like people who get on the bus and people who get off the bus can stop for 5 minutes. And I think that unhauling and hauling is unequivocal to people who get on and off the bus, because when you're on the bus you have a backpack, a purse, or like a lunch pail, but I don't think you're going to have like a couch going in and out on a bus. So I think it needs to be reconsidered, the amount of time for unhauling and hauling, because I don't want businesses to be punished for the amount of you're going to be getting more sales tax from businesses than the tickets or the for the meters that you have here. So if you bring more business, as from the first point, I think it would really help with the unhauling and hauling. And then, and the other reason is, especially for trucks, so commercial trucks I've seen on Baltimore Street and other main streets, is because sometimes they may resort to unsafe parking locations if there's like parking meters or whatnot, or highway shoulders, or unauthorized areas. So I know that there's some businesses here downtown that use commercial trucks and stuff like that, so hoping to make it easier for them in the parking situation as well. So that's all I had to say. Thank you for letting me be here, and look forward to hearing the rest.
Thank you. Public comment.
Hello, I'm Brian Kennel, live at 799 Baltimore Street, Evergreen Cemetery. And at the last Borough meeting, I asked for Mr. Gable to send me information, which he kindly did. And I reviewed the information, but I guess my question would be, I just want to ask a few questions because I don't want to take up your time if this isn't the appropriate time to do it. But I saw the renditions for the Gateway project, and as I stated earlier in the month, I have deep concerns of safety and deep concerns of the possibility of losing 9 meters along the Soldier Cemetery for visitation, which is within the borough, to Cemetery Hill, for visitation to the Soldier Cemetery. We would be affected by funeral processions, by the rendering that they had. They put a crosswalk in an area that is blind to the uphill traffic coming into into Gettysburg. If you remove the meters along Baltimore Street, people will be forced to park on the downslope below the gatehouse going out of town. And if you can imagine buses trying to parallel park, pull out on that down slope past the gatehouse, my question would be, because I don't want to go into it too far, is there any way I would be able to meet at the area where this is proposed with any members of the borough management or the council to give perspective of having been there for 50 years, of knowing what happens in trying to keep the gatehouse entranceway safe? I feel I have a lot of experience. I'm not just coming from the perspective of living there in Evergreen. I am totally worried that if these 9 meters are taken away along that stretch, think how many, I think of the busloads of kids, seniors, military personnel that come and park there and cross the street. And they typically come towards the gatehouse where they can see downhill. My question would be, because I don't want to take up much of your time, because I would like to meet with somebody there in front of the gatehouse and just offer my perspective rather than trying to cover it in here, because I would rather voice in that position where I feel what I have seen in the Gettysburg Times to be very critical to visitation and to the National Cemetery, to handicapped people. We get veterans markers delivered to our address. This would not be able to happen with the proposal that was shown in the paper. So is that a possibility, to meet with members or a few members out in front of the cemetery so that I can show this in person, my concerns representing living there, representing knowing funeral processions, knowing trends that tourists have of seeing accidents nearly happen? Because if the proposal that was in the paper would be put into place, imagine a group of people standing along in the entranceway of Evergreen and somebody trying to pull in and it's a single lane and they can't pull over like they would do now. These are the things I would like to meet with somebody there to give all kinds of angles on this subject, because I think it's very important. I know there's beautification involved. I know that there are safety concerns, but what I saw in the paper is actually could cause more accidents than the way it is now. Is there a way to meet with somebody?
So this is just our public comment. We're here to receive your comments. It's not necessarily a back and forth. But my cards are out in the lobby. Grab one, give me a call, come down and talk to you.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Our first topic for new business today has to do with Chapter 1-403 of the ordinance, qualifications, abilities, duties, and responsibilities of the Chief of Police and how we hire that person. I believe Ms. Figueroa-Ocasio is going to dial in our labor attorney at this point to help us with this discussion, so we'll take a brief moment here while that's happening. Hi, Jonathan. This is Matt Moon. You're on the speakerphone here in the Gettysburg Borough Council work session. Patty, are you still on? Did we lose Patty? She might be muted.
It's not showing muted.
No, I mean, she might be muted on her end. I'm texting her, hold on. Okay, she can hear us. That's great. Okay.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, Jonathan, thank you. We can hear you. Sorry, we're
Oh, good.
ham-fistedly trying to work our telephone here. All right, where'd you go? Okay. Maddie, if you could launch us on this discussion, I'd appreciate. And then we've got Attorney Whalen here to help whenever we might need.
So tonight, we're here to begin a conversation how to discuss important updates to the ordinance and civil service regulations as we prepare for the upcoming search for the chief of police position. It's just essentially to ensure that we are reflecting best practices and are providing the best opportunity to attract the best candidate to the borough. Looking at the ordinances, it's been over 35 years since it was last updated, so it's very overdue. By taking this time now to go through the ordinance and the civil service regulations, we can ensure that we are aligning both the civil service and the ordinances to each other and current modern best practices to avoid any legal pitfalls that we may face later on if the process is challenged later on.
All right, so where would you like to start this discussion tonight?
We can start with the ordinances. One of the areas that we've been looking at is the qualifications of the candidates. It doesn't match the civil service regs. The civil service regs says that we should look for a candidate that has a minimum of a bachelor's degree, or ordinances doesn't have an education requirement. I believe that we should keep that bachelor's versus another degree. Most of the municipalities around us require a bachelor's degree. The other area that I was focusing on was their continued education. I suggest that we seek a candidate that has some experience either through the FBI Academy or Northwestern University. They have a police training that just will give a candidate additional administrative skills that they might not learn while on the force, which would help them better serve our community because they would be able to communicate better. Study shows that they use less legal force with a higher education. So these are all things that we can keep in mind.
Okay, so we're starting with the revised borough ordinance 1-401, and we're moving down to section 1-403, in case council members would like to follow along here if you're not able to see the screen like me. So in 1-403, I see that you've made some changes here. Can you talk to us about the changes there?
Sorry, I can't. I'm nearsighted. Thank you. So this is another area that you guys might want to consider is right now we are very tied in with the civil service regulations. Mm-hmm. We might want to make that optional. Not saying that we can't do it, just make it an optional for the candidate to choose whether or not they fall under the civil service regulations. That would give us the opportunity to make this hire a contractual hire, so we can put a limit to their term and better evaluate the candidate for if they're not working out. We have criteria to consider for the evaluation that are different from the MOPAC standard.
And I'm sorry, would that give the applicant the choice, or would it give the council the choice?
The council.
Okay. So instead of where it has historically said shall, we would change that to may. shall then subject such person to a non-competitive examination. And then it looks like we have more language added there that says Borough Council may also appoint a candidate to the office of Chief Police outside of the non-competitive examination process. Attorney Whalen, would you mind weighing in on these changes and where you think that they, what the benefits or liabilities would be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Mounty was mentioning, the borough's civil service rules and regulations, and this ordinance as well, but they had made the appointment of a police chief through civil service a mandatory process. And so what that means is, so under the borough code, a police chief can simply just be hired as an employee, and if that's the case, then they're an at-will employee like any other borough employee who's, you know, not covered by a collective bargaining agreement. Or the police chief can be hired through this process, this non-competitive examination and nomination process. And if they are hired through that process, then they have civil service protections from removal. And so there's only, you know, a few different reasons why you could remove the police chief from their position if that is how they're appointed. So, but that is a totally optional process under the borough code. It was only mandatory in the borough because the borough's civil service rules had made it mandatory. And so, as Matty was saying, you don't have to do that, or you could. And so the point of these possible revisions would be to preserve that flexibility. You know, some reasons why you might want to do it are, you know, somewhat, you know, kind of obvious. You might have a candidate who you really want, but they might insist on it because it gives them a level of job protection. On the other hand, though, especially when you're talking about the position of chief of police, which has a lot of influence and it has a lot of, you know, obviously control over the police department, it's something, it can be a position that you want to have flexibility with. And if you appoint a police chief and there's problems that arise, you know, it can be not advantageous to be very limited in your ability to move on from that particular person. And that can't happen if someone's appointed through civil service because you're very circumscribed in your ability to move on. And so that would be one of the reasons why you might do it. But the point is that it's optional, and it doesn't have to be mandatory. And I don't really see a downside to giving yourself the flexibility to go one way or the other. It certainly doesn't need to be mandatory, but it can be something that you would do in the right circumstances, and that is the borough's flexibility to exercise. Obviously, the rules and the ordinance would have to be amended, but that's kind of the rationale behind some of those changes from a civil service perspective and from the perspective of what the borough code does and doesn't require.
Okay, I'd like to give a little background here, if you don't mind. And at any moment, if I'm misstating this, Attorney Whalen, please talk over me and shut me up.
Yeah.
But the civil service exists for a really important reason. My predecessor here, Wes Heiser, spoke about this frequently. You know, 100 years ago, police departments, sheriff's departments tended to hire through practices that we would frown upon today: nepotism, cronyism, you know, sort of the old boyism. In this particular geographic area, it was not uncommon for every employee of the department to be members of the same lodge, and you can take whatever meaning from the word lodge you'd like. So the civil service process was instituted by the federal government as a tool to help us sort of break up those hiring practices that were not conducive to undoing some of the cultures that were sort of untouchable in policing. And it's happened very, successfully for the better part of the 20th century. But we have an interesting thing that has kind of evolved over time, where when we're hiring any position through civil service, there are certain things we have to favor. For example, veterans of the military get preferential treatment in hiring. So if we had a pool of 10 applicants, we submit them all to background checks, psychological exams, and a test. That civil service test is going to be the tool with which we create a pool of people we can consider for hiring. So the top 3 scores, for example, might be the people we would then interview and try to determine who we wanted to hire. Under the civil service process, the top score could be our dream candidate, right? It could be this amazing person who just fell out of the sky and clicks with all of us and has this vision that we all share, and we think this is great. And this person might have scored 8 points higher than the third candidate, but if the third candidate is a veteran and the first 2 candidates are not, we are compelled to hire the third ranked member. So there's a potential downside there. The other thing that's I think changed over time too for us, why we would want to consider this here, is that the role of the chief of police has evolved over the last decades and is very much now under the Borough Code, and this is my understanding, and please again step in if I'm wrong, Harry as well. The chief is a managerial employee of the borough. They are not a member of the collective bargaining unit. They are not, for all intents and purposes, a rank and file police officer. They are the equivalent of the borough manager. They are peers with the other department heads, and when it comes to a negotiation or discipline of an officer in that department, they are representatives of the borough's management, not the department. But when a chief is hired through the civil service process and has come up through the civil service process and is protected by the same civil service process, sometimes those lines blur a little bit, and they're harder for us as oversight of those managing departments to maintain.
Yeah, so just briefly, the second kind of series of points that you made there, I would agree with and echo. The only clarification I would make to something you said in the first series of points is that veterans preference rules, you accurately described how they apply during the civil service hiring process. If you have your group of 3 candidates, even if it's the third-ranked candidate, if they're a veteran, they have to be appointed. But veterans preference laws exist, independently of civil service. That's how they apply in civil service, but they also apply outside of civil service as well. And so you can find yourself in that sort of situation that you describe, where you might have someone who maybe you'd rather hire, but you have someone else who's also qualified for the position, and that's the important point. They have to be qualified. It's not enough that they're just a veteran; they have to be qualified. But if they are, then the law requires that person be given preference as well, and that applies regardless of what the hiring is. In fact, it explicitly applies in the non-civil service context. And I know that's not really what we're dealing with here, but we at our firm deal with it quite a bit with many of our clients who have to navigate that. And so I just wanted to make sure that was explained. You're right that that's how it applies in civil service, but you really can't get around the application of veterans preference really in any context. That's always going to be a factor. But as to your second point, that all of that is absolutely right. You have some very small departments, and there's not many of them, but there are some throughout the state where the police chief is a working chief. You know, he or she they're out there patrolling, you know, just like everyone else. They pretty much do the same thing, except they're kind of in charge. And they're a member of the bargaining unit oftentimes as well. It's not the case for most places, and it's not the case for Gettysburg either. And it is closer in line to an administrative position, like a managerial position, you know, not unlike, you know, like a borough manager or a township manager, but with, you know, exclusively dealing with the police department. It's a much different position than it might have been in the past, and it is one that is more aligned, you know, with you know, Borough Council or the borough manager, whoever it may be, and is less of a, you know, patrolling law enforcement officer. And that can be a drawback if you have civil service protections that nonetheless apply to someone who's not, you know, out there patrolling the streets like, you know, a typical police officer who's appointed through civil service would be doing, and is there to represent the interests of the municipality and to, you know, be the administrative figurehead representing the municipality. If they also, you know, have these civil service removal protections, it can be easy for those interests to start to deviate and for the municipality to not really be able to do anything about it because, you know, they haven't engaged in any conduct unbecoming of a police officer or any, you know, notoriously disgraceful crimes of moral turpitude, you know, all the language that's in these civil service laws that are the only reasons you're allowed to get rid of somebody who's protected by civil service. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, I mean, hopefully, no matter who you hire and what process they're hired through, you don't find yourself in a situation like that. But it can happen, and you can be, you know, your flexibility is limited if civil service was the method of appointment. And so that's the argument against it, is all.
All right. So that's a pertinent point for us, right? Unfortunately, we do have sort of a checkered history in our hiring of chiefs. So what I'm hearing, and please, you know, tell me if I'm understanding this correctly or not, is that the council's purview to hire, fire, and discipline is limited when a chief is hired through the civil service process.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I mean, council is still the appointing authority, and it's still the entity that would remove or fire somebody, but if someone's appointed through civil service, you can only exercise that authority in response to a few different reasons. Right. And, you know, and I listed some like conduct unbecoming of an officer, or, you know, like illegal activity, or notoriously disgraceful conduct. I mean, stuff like that, which the courts have interpreted, like they have generally accepted meanings, but it's a very high standard, and it's not just, you know, being uncooperative with Borough Council,
right?
Or you know, maybe like, I guess it could be depending on how it exactly manifests itself, but it's not just it's a much higher standard, and it's not just that. I mean, it also grants appeal rights. So, you know, if you do remove someone protected by civil service and you do it for one of the allowable reasons, that person can still first appeal it to the Civil Service Commission, and then after that to the local Common Pleas Court. So it creates a whole, you know, mechanism for challenging the removal as well that has to be contended with. So yes, it is. That authority is certainly heavily circumscribed.
Okay. So have you had a chance to read through the proposed changes to this ordinance here? Attorney Whalen?
yeah, yes. I actually was asked some time ago to, put together some draft revisions, which I did. And I don't know what version you all are looking at. If you're looking at the one that I have, there's red lines that are, or revisions, I should say, they're in two different colors.
Yes.
And I know that Maddie kind of did some research and added to the qualifications. And then in terms of the revisions to like the civil service hiring process and making that optional, I did those revisions.
Okay.
and have, and showed them and discussed them with Charles and Maddie recently ahead of this meeting. So yes, I'm familiar with what's in there. And like I said, the point is to just make that process optional, whereas it had previously, and it still is at the moment, mandatory for Gettysburg.
Great. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good overview. So since this is short, this is really only it's less than a page here of changes. I think we should just read through them all, and if any of the council members here have a objection, feel free to interrupt at any time. But let's try to kind of get through this, and then we'll consider this again at our next meeting as well.
Could I ask the attorney a question?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Chris Berger here. How prevalent is this not having civil service mandatory for a municipality of our size? Has there been a movement away from that? I worry sometimes about the political nature of law enforcement, how it's been politicized in the recent, years as well, and so.
Well, so I'll say this. It is. I know that they recodified the borough code, maybe 10 years ago or so, but even before that, the borough code has always made this process optional. It's always been optional. And I can't speak with any sort of like statistical certainty, but I do work with a lot of municipalities and I work with a lot of boroughs. And just off the top of my head, I can only think of one other borough that made this mandatory. Every other borough civil service rules and regulations that I've seen, it's just a restatement of what's in the borough code, which says that the borough may nominate a police chief candidate to the Civil Service Commission for a non-competitive examination. That's what it is. And now maybe they do it, maybe they typically do it, but I know a lot of places don't. I mean, they just hire the person and then the person's an at-will employee. I mean, that's very common. But I would say, in my experience, 95% of places, at least in their rules anyway, it's an optional process, just like it's an optional process under the borough code.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that helpful? Okay. All right, so I'll just read through these very quickly. In the case of a vacancy, the borough may, as opposed to shall, nominate a person to the Civil Service Commission, and then there's the addition. Borough Council may also appoint a candidate to the office of the Chief of Police outside of this non-competitive examination process. Next line, subsection A, the person nominated, here's an added language, to the Civil Service Commission for a non-competitive examination or appointed by the Borough Council without nomination to the Civil Service Commission must possess the following qualifications. We just cleaned up some language there. So it looks like we have some strike-throughs in the second section where we've taken it from 5 years of experience to including 2 years of supervisory experience. We've taken it to 10 years of service as a certified police officer. And then we've added below that a minimum of 3 years in a managerial or supervisory position. Alternately, graduation from recognized law enforcement training institutions such as the FBI National Academy, Northwestern University School of Police Staff and Command, the Southern Police Institute or equivalent preferred. And note, when we use the word preferred as opposed to required, we are giving ourselves some latitude as well. Moving to the next page, looks like the next addition is to subsection B. If Borough Council nominates a candidate to the Civil Service Commission for a non-competitive examination, the examination by the Civil Service Commission shall seek to determine that the nominee possesses the knowledge, skills, and ability. No further changes from there on. Then in subsection C, if the Borough Council nominates a candidate to the Civil Service Commission for a non-competitive examination, and if such nominee is certified by the Civil Service Commission as qualified and is thereafter appointed, or if the Borough Council appoints a qualified candidate to the office of the Chief of Police without nomination to the Civil Service Commission for a non-competitive examination, he or she shall be responsible for the overall administration of the operation of the police department. C sub 3, we have the safety committee of the borough has been struck. That no longer exists as we are no longer under a committee system. And it looks like we've got some notes, just some clarifications from Ms. Sanders. Questions there we can address. Section 4, she says to evaluate employee work performance and recommend promotions. And can you explain your comment there, please?
Which one?
We're on
I have 3.
C4. To evaluate employee work performance and recommend promotions, and you've commented.
Yeah, I said I think this should include and submit performance reviews. So to just simply require that the chief evaluate the employee work performance without any evidence that the work performance has been evaluated, I just felt like it just kind of left us on a cliffhanger a little bit. Like, where's that evaluation going? And I said the same thing about preparing budget estimates and continuing to control budget expenditures, that is it inferred that these estimates are going to be shared with someone? So to prepare the budget estimates is one thing to me, and I would imagine that we would also need to have those budget estimates and expenditures also shared. So it's just a matter of language in my suggestions. Okay. And my last suggestion, where it says to meet with the borough manager, borough council, and the mayor, and to keep them informed, I suggested to meet, communicate, and collaborate with the borough manager, borough council, and mayor to keep them informed of departmental needs and activities along with public safety concerns. I know personally I would like to hear more from the chief, whoever's hired, about what they need.
Yeah. So on your first comment, I absolutely agree.
And I just said
I think we would have that policy is probably stated elsewhere, maybe in the employee handbook, as to how evaluations should be submitted and where they're retained.
Right.
On the second one, I think preparing budget estimates is the budgetary process that's submitted to council.
Okay.
That's submitted to the manager in August, September.
Okay, and that would also
the
be outlined then in the
budget is then prepared and approved by council.
Okay.
And then the manager does do a monthly departmental budgetary sort of status report for each department head. So I
Okay.
think that's actually kind of also
Already included.
policy that's already in place.
Okay, great.
And then in the third point, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Anybody else have any thoughts on anything we just read through?
I did have another thought. So if we were to change the language and it would reflect this flexibility of us to either nominate through the civil service or appoint, if a candidate were nominated through the civil service and the Civil Service Commission requires a 4-year degree, would we not then be required then to ensure that the appointed person has a 4-year degree? Do you see what I'm saying?
Well,
Oh, yeah, you should take that, attorney. Thank you.
yeah, so I'm not sure. I mean, maybe there's some way that that the borough operates in this manner, that I'm not aware of. But the role envisioned for the Civil Service Commission in this process is to simply administer this non-competitive examination. And that is a very vague term, and it's not defined in the borough code. It can be any number of things. Typically, it's just an interview, really. And it's, above in this ordinance, there's a description of kind of what is evaluated by the commission as part of this, the police administration, crime prevention, investigation, etc. But it's the administration of that non-competitive exam. It would surprise me and it would strike me as unusual if the Civil Service Commission could prescribe a job qualification, you must have a 4-year degree, or that the person must be this or that. And they can evaluate the suitability of the candidate, but it wouldn't be the setting of a minimum qualification in a job application. But I'd ask, because this has been a mandatory process in the borough. What role did the commission play, in the appointment of the last police chief? Because I assume he got a non-competitive exam, so I don't know what role they played.
Sarah, do you have any insights as to what the involvement was?
I'm not sure what the involvement of civil service was at that time. I know we had a committee, and I'm not sure that anyone from the committee's civil service chair sat on that committee.
Chris or Patty, do either of you have any direct memories from that last hiring process? No.
Yeah, my answer to that would, unless there's just something that I'm not aware of, and that would definitely be unusual. Setting the job qualifications. You all are doing it now as Borough Council. You're revising or contemplating the revision of an ordinance that establishes, what the job qualifications are. That's certainly something that's within council's domain to determine, to set the minimum qualifications for a position like this. So the Civil Service Commission could, if they didn't view someone as, possessing the qualities that would lead them to, pass them on this non-competitive exam, they could exercise, that ability to try to block somebody. But, ultimately then, the person either just is not appointed or Borough Council just appoints them outside of that process. That's how it would likely play out.
Where do we currently see that degree requirement?
I see it in the general qualifications for Chief of Police under the revised Borough Civil Service Rules and Regulations.
Do you have a page number?
Well, it's section 3.9, page 13. It says, every applicant for the position of Chief of Police shall have earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice or a related field from an accredited college or university. And then it goes on to talk about accreditation from the institutions that Madi just mentioned, the FBI National Academy, the Northwestern University. It says additionally graduation from those or equivalent is preferred. So to me, it would be the shall is where I see in that civil service rules.
So that's in the Civil Service Rules and Regulations. And now I think I better understand your question. Mm-hmm. As a borough, you are bound by what's in your Civil Service Rules and Regulations. Mm-hmm. And so if that is currently in your Civil Service Rules and Regulations, then yes, you would, if a 4-year degree is required, then it's required by your rules and regulations. Now, those can be changed, and there are changes in there, about making the non-competitive exam process optional. So those rules can be amended, but as they currently are, and as they are in their amended form, while they're in place, they are binding. So yes, in that sense, a 4-year degree is required by the rules and regulations. And I apologize for any confusion. I thought the question was relating to, like, if the commission has a non-competitive examination of somebody and they, like, require a 4-year degree in order to pass that examination, what would happen there. But no, so I understand now you're talking about the rules and regulations, and in that case, yes, I agree that those are binding. So right now, that is a requirement.
Okay.
Can I ask him another question? Attorney Whalen, what is your thoughts on the qualification to have a 4-year degree? What's the, was there any legal pitfalls for not having that qualification?
Not like, necessarily, right? There's no independent requirement for a degree, being required for this position. But it is, kind of going back to what we were discussing earlier. The police chief position, it's much closer to, like the borough manager position than it is to, patrol officer. It's an administrative position, and it's a position that requires the person to, wear a lot of different hats, so to speak. And it's a position that requires the use of a lot of judgment and a lot of interpretive ability. So just to give you an example, and not to say that someone who does not have a bachelor's degree wouldn't be able to do this. This is just talking about, what you could maybe use as a proxy. But even patrol officers, just in their day-to-day operations, they have to be cognizant of pretty, complicated rules, from the Fourth Amendment, searches and seizures to, they have to have a very wide knowledge of criminal law and, court cases, interpreting those laws and how they apply in specific situations. And that's demanding, and it requires a lot of critical thinking ability and critical reading ability, frankly, that when you have someone who's in charge of the department and who's making high-level decisions and who's reviewing the actions of their subordinates, someone who has, attained a level of higher education, you would at least make the assumption that they would have that capacity. Now, obviously, there's exceptions to every rule, and it's not a perfect predictor, and anyone, could potentially do just as well in that sort of thing, without a bachelor's degree. But you would expect that a requirement like that would yield a group of candidates who probably, or you would think, possess those sorts of abilities and those sorts of, that sort of critical thinking ability, just because of the further education that they attained, where they received training in that sort of function. But also, it's just, like we said, it's a position that requires a lot of different skills and a lot of different abilities, more than just what would be required of a patrol officer, and more than would be required of, some other rank and file employee of the borough. It's very much a leadership and administrative-based position, and, it's a position that in other contexts, if you gave the same responsibilities, the same expectations, the same duties, if you gave those sorts of, analogous duties and responsibilities to a position, outside the police department or in some other context, it's probably 9 times out of 10 a position that requires a bachelor's degree in most circumstances. Now, I don't know exactly, what the requirements are in the borough for, some other positions, but I mean, you can just look at this ordinance and look what all is expected of the police chief, preparing budget estimates and putting together, budgetary materials and monitoring expenditures, making purchases on and behalf of the department, even, evaluating personnel, do performance evaluations, leadership ability. These are, like human resources type tasks. So you have HR type tasks, you have, financial, almost, accountant sort of responsibilities, as well as just administrative duties. And then, like I, was getting at earlier, the sort of critical thinking and judgment that's required of it, and say making like a constitutional judgment when reviewing the actions of a subordinate. And so it's a very multifaceted job, and seems like one that typically would require a degree, and for which a degree certainly, even if it's not necessary, even if you have individuals who, and I'm sure, this is the case, I'm sure there are plenty of individuals without a bachelor's degree who could do just as good or better of a job as, the next person who happened to have it. But you would expect that candidates with bachelor's degree, even if others possess them as well, but that they would possess those abilities simply because they received that level of training. So that would be my own sort of personal analysis of it, personal and professional analysis of it based on my experience in dealing with various police departments across the state. But ultimately, I mean, there's not going to be an objective answer to that. It's up to the borough, really. But if you were inclined to retain that requirement, those would be the considerations, and I think that they make sense. I think the requirement, having it, makes sense for those reasons.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. I was just passed a little note that there is somebody here on this table who does have some information as to civil services involvement in the last search process. Our solicitor, Mr. Eastman.
And first, let me say, because we have an ordinance saying it's mandatory, I would have hoped that we had gone through a civil service process in that hiring. But it's clear that the borough did go through that in 2019 with the hiring of Chief Glennie. Indeed, his employment agreement indicates that, in fact, one of the concepts that the borough was going to reimburse him for part of his travel expenses for a civil service interview or examination, as Mr. Whalen properly described to you. That would have happened in January or on January 22nd of 2019. So we did go through that process. Just kind of interesting as we look at this and so forth, just kind of to provide you with a historical context. It's actually, it'll be 65 years to the date on July 5th when the Borough Council created its police department. And it was at that time that you authorized the hiring of a chief of police pursuant to the Borough Code provisions. Interestingly, and I think I was in law school in 1986. I hate to ask Mr. Whalen where he was in 1986. I'm terribly afraid of that answer. I can't answer, but it seems very, very clear that in 1986, the council, for whatever reason, felt very compelled to make this a mandatory process. And I was going to say, and I wonder, Sarah, when was, oh gosh.
That was Fred Gantz.
That's when Fred Gantz was hired.
Yes.
It smacks of me to be that this is very specifically set forth with regards to a particular hire, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that wouldn't surprise me. I don't know the exact history, but it wouldn't surprise me. And because that is, one thing I've seen on a couple of occasions is, in places where this is optional, there's a candidate who everyone really wants, and so that therefore the person has a little bit of leverage. And if they know, the ins and outs, if they know what happens if they're appointed to civil service versus not, they'll insist on it. And sometimes, the municipality will, not budge on it, and then other times they'll say, all right, let's put this person through the exam because this is the person that we want. Because it's like negotiation for anything else, like negotiation for like a severance agreement or something. It's the same type of concept when you boil it down.
Yeah, I think it also has to do, too, with the fact that, 40 years ago or whatever, smaller municipalities like ours were probably much less likely to secure the services of a professional firm to help with these executive searches, to vet these candidates. And so the civil service becomes that sort of, vetting in a box for small agencies that can't afford to or didn't want to make the expense of securing professional services for this. That's certainly what we're doing this time. We've already secured the services of a professional firm to do all of the T crossing and I dotting in that executive search as well. And I think, moving forward, that's probably going to be a best practice for us, the next time it happens and the time after that, too. So for the council members here, does anybody have any objection to the changes that are being proposed by Maddie and by Attorney Whalen?
I had one thing here, or two. Just about the degree for college, it looks like there's around 30.2% of police officers that do have a college degree. But a lot of times, if it's not required for academy, you just go to academy instead of paying for a 4-year degree. So it definitely will shrink our pool a lot. So that's something to think about and consider, I think.
Well, it's the existing requirement as it is, so it's not going to shrink our pool. It's going to keep it the same, but taking it out of the civil service process is a different question.
Yeah. And then the last one, C11, I think it is, to perform any other duties as prescribed by Borough Council and as directed by the mayor. I just want to make sure that we're not making it ambiguous. So if, as far as the hierarchy there goes, what if we prescribe something, but then the mayor directs something different? Like if we're at odds there, I hope that wouldn't be the case, but is there any wording there that we should be worried about? Maybe this is a question for a counselor.
Yeah, so what I would say is, under the Borough Code, there are a number of provisions, and they're pretty vague, unfortunately, and they lead to a lot of confusion. But there are a number of provisions that delineate what Borough Council is in charge of with respect to the police, and what the mayor's in charge of with respect to the police. And kind of one of the most basic divisions is that the code says council prescribes the duties of the police, the members of the police force, including the chief, and then the mayor directs them in the performance of those duties. So council decides what they do, and the mayor decides how they do what council has prescribed that they do. That's the easy way of thinking about it. But obviously, in reality, that can certainly be ambiguous, and it certainly and it does in many places lead to a lot of confusion. But but that is how it's laid out in the code. And, you know, there are some court decisions that help illuminate exactly what that looks like, but that's the division. Council prescribes the duties, the mayor, you know, directs the performance of those duties.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Anybody else? Patty, if you need to unmute and let us know any of your thoughts, go ahead. So it sounds like we think you're moving in the right direction. Thanks for a thoughtful and informative discussion, both of you. Thanks for joining us tonight, Attorney Whalen. We appreciate you as always.
Absolutely. The only other, I know, I think today we were just talking about the ordinance, but to, you know, echo what we spoke about a few minutes ago, you know, this ordinance, you know, would have to be revised if we wanted to adopt these revisions. But also, the civil service regulations would as well, or else, you know, those would still be binding.
Right.
So I'm sure you guys will be reviewing those, you know, in a few weeks, but I just wanted to circle back on that point, because it was whoever it was who raised it, it was a good point, and it's absolutely correct. But otherwise, that's all that I had.
All right. Well, then we'll say good night to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
And thank you, Maddie. I think we've got a sense of direction here. Okay, great. We're going to move on at this point to current and old business, and we're going to touch on Chapter 15 and the parking amendments with Ms. Fissel.
Good evening. I am thinking, we're on part 5, where we left off last time. I'm thinking maybe we can get 5 and 6 done tonight, but
Give us a page number.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I don't know that mine has. It's 15-5. Let me see if there's page numbers on this. Mine is not showing any page numbers.
On the right side of your screen.
39.
Thank you.
5.
No, mine doesn't.
Number 39.
39. Okay. All right.
Okay.
So page 39, 15501, definitions.
All right. So I do not have anything until 15504. So should probably be 40 then, I would guess. And so the only thing that would be changing there, that's just matching the language to part 4, which would be that we change to the placement and characteristic of the meters instead of the installation, because as technology is progressing, we're not putting meters in, we're doing things like kiosks and app only. So, it wouldn't be the installation of the meters.
Okay.
And that, like I said, matching the same language as the previous part. And that's what all of this is. But so part 2 would be adding the kiosk then to that, and 3 would be the app only.
Okay.
And then 1505 would be the payment for parking. So, some of these haven't been updated since the 80s and things, and it was all coin. So, because apps and we do take credit cards and bills and things on the kiosk, so that's just payment for parking now. And then further down in there, it says about reviewing the rates indicated on the legend of the meter, and then we did at some point add kiosk, and then or by appropriate signage for the app-only locations.
Okay.
15506. That's, again, adding the signage posted. So we're just matching all meter kiosk signage posted on all of the sections. Let's see. Part 15506-2A looks like offshoot. We removed that. I believe that was Monday through Saturday and Sunday prevailing. That was the changing of the lots there. So the borough lot, there's the borough lot, the county lot, and the deck lot, which are the 3 locations there that are off-street parking that we have. And they are different. Currently, the borough lot is a 3-hour lot. The county lot is a 12-hour lot, and the deck lot is a 12-hour.
Can you go back to 15506 sub 2, please? It looks like Ms. Sanders made a comment there.
Sure. Proof of payment. Oh, yes. So parking shall be permissible in individual parking space where parking meters, kiosks, or signage have been installed in locations indicated, then design periods. So the pay-by-phone system would be the signage. We added signage there to reflect, because the signage states pay-by-phone. The meters do also state payment by pay-by-phone on the meters.
Is that addressing your comment?
I think
Yes.
that was,
Okay.
is that what you were asking?
Yes, because
Okay.
it still said coin in the meters.
Yes.
In that meter, and replacing it with signage makes more sense.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like we did add just signage there on top, on that part.
Right, but then at the end of the section, it still says, upon the deposit of the indicated coins in that meter.
We will review that here.
Okay.
256. Meter. Okay. We will check on that with, we have been meeting with the solicitor several times to go over each parts of these, so when there's different revisions and things, and in the next part, we'll have some additional meetings with him as well.
Great.
So we'll review that one. So I think 2A there, rates are for off-street parking, metered parking shall be established in resolutions. I think, this one had Monday through Saturday, Sunday between the hours of 1, but like I said, some of those are 3 hours and some are 12 hours. And then the borough lot was currently only Monday through Saturday and 8 to 8 and Sunday 1 to 8, but the other 2 lots are 24 hours. So the thought was to make just all the lots 24 hours to simplify it for anybody asking about off-street lots. It would all be the same.
Okay.
Let's see. And then B and C, that would be the same thing, that we eliminated those if we made everything all 3 the same.
Sure.
There is some weird spacing and things that we have to try to fit. We're trying to figure out the formatting on, so there's some blank pages and gaps and things. But we're trying to work on that. 15507. Not showing anything.
Nope. Nothing in 508.
Nothing in 508.
Nothing in 509.
Nothing.
15511.
Nothing in 510. Looks like 511 is next.
511, yes. 511 is changing that language to the 14 calendar days as we did in the previous part as well. Currently, like I said, on the ticket itself, it says if you pay an overtime ticket within 7 days,
Right.
you can pay the discounted rate. And then at the very bottom of the ticket, it says if you don't pay it within 7 days, it can be turned over to the district justice. So we're just matching that 14-day language to the part prior to this. And that's part A and B there. Uh, 15512 looks like the collection of and counting of the coins that are deposited in the meters, the kiosks. This just says the borough manager, his or her designee, will assign someone, member of the parking department or other person to collect that.
Okay.
So then we're on to part 6. And the first thing I have in there is under the definitions, I believe, 15603 is the definitions. And we've just added the parking department as a definition, and it just says the parking department of the Borough of Gettysburg. That previously was not defined.
Yep.
And then we go on, the towing rotation list. This says the rotation list of the inspected and approved towing companies by the police department. The rotation list shall be maintained by the parking department, representing all tow companies licensed by the borough, which reflects the 7-day rotation list of licensed towing companies pursuant to 15607.
Great.
So previously, that was the chief, but I know I have not had a list in probably 4 years, so for towing. So we do parking and planning, both do permits. So we were trying to bring permits all together.
Yeah.
Um, 15604. That just said police officer for the authority to remove and impound.
Okay.
So that would mean we'd have to call the police every time we needed a car towed. So we just added the or a parking enforcement officer onto that.
Great.
And then a lot of the 15605, it was annual license, but we're also, since we're doing the permitting, it's license permit. So we've just added permit to a lot of that. So it's just a towing license / permit is required. And the license, the towing company shall be license permitted annually. That just previously had said license, so that's what a lot of these are. The next one also, license permit, was just adjusted, and then shall be submitted to the parking department, the application.
Okay.
The application shall be properly completed, signed, and submitted to the parking department with a proper licensing permit fee. That was still 15603 there.
That was 603.
Yes, sorry. It's right before that weird gap page. If there's a gap on yours, there's a big gap on mine here.
Great.
And then it goes to
Looks like 604 is just missing.
Yeah. Wait, I think, Harry, was this where it jumped to the next page? Something was, off with the,
Yeah, 603 just kind of stops mid-sentence, and then
Yeah.
it picks up in the middle of a
we
sentence
found
in
it somewhere
1605.
else though.
604 and 605 are right before 603.
Yeah, I thought there was, I remembered one page being off, and it has something to do with the numbering at the top left there, which I don't know. I don't number that, so I don't know where this came from, but that's what a lot of the formatting too I said would need to be changed. So 604, I'm not showing anything there.
Ugh. 604, it looks like you added, or a parking enforcement officer.
Oops, let me look here, sorry. Oh yeah, there it is. Yeah, sorry. Oh, and we did go over that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just out of it.
So it just jumped, the pages are kind of changed there. So, so then that one that you said would go down would be, okay, application for the license permit shall be submitted to the parking department, and then you gotta skip that to that next page again, I believe. Where it goes to, that part of applicable regulations, once the facilities have been inspected and approved, the borough's parking department shall issue a towing license permit.
So that's 15605 at the top of page 48.
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe all these then, A just added the word permit to the license.
Yep.
Same with B, C, D.
And then it looks like we jumped to 15607 on page 50.
Yeah, 607. So that is the towing rotation. So upon inspection and the approval of the towing companies by the police department, the parking department shall issue the license permit to the applicant. The parking department shall maintain the list of licensed towing companies listed alphabetically to be requested by authorized borough employees on a rotating basis. And then we didn't change, the rotation period shall reflect a 7-day rotation list and shall be adhered to by the borough in making towing requests. This towing rotation list shall be provided to the office of the manager, parking department, and the police department.
Okay.
And then at the bottom again, a current rotation list shall be maintained at all times by the parking department.
Great.
15608 under general regulations, and then that just said police, so we've just added the police department or the parking department can request the licensed towing company.
Okay.
At the bottom of part 3 there, it's nothing in this regulation is intended to permit or encourage the towing company to violate any provisions of the vehicle code or to operate a vehicle in an unsafe manner, but, oh, that was the same. I'm not sure why that changed.
It's like just the comma.
The comma maybe was taken out. Yeah. Remove the comma there. I don't know what. Sorry, this was our last review, or the time before our review with Solicitor Eastman, so I'm not 100% up on it today, but so the next one there I'm showing is 15608, I think, part 8.
Just
It
adding
jumps
the
again.
parking department in.
It jumps again, but yes, just naming the parking department there. And then we go to there. looks like 15611.
Yep.
Notification of removal within 1 hour from the time of removal of a vehicle from private property by any towing service. The Gettysburg Borough Parking Department shall be notified by the towing service, which shall provide the parking department with a copy or fax of the written authorization that shall include the following information.
Okay.
And that's, you know, all the information on the vehicle, nothing of that changed. And that, they do contact the dispatch as well to let them know that a vehicle was towed. The towing companies do call them to let them know they towed a vehicle and where they towed it from. I'm showing 15613, number 2. Every licensed towing company on or before the 15th day of each month shall send a copy of its towing records to the parking department for the previous month.
Great.
And most of that is just matching up to the permit too. The 15617, complaints against the towing companies. That is, the chief of police shall notify a towing company owner within 15 calendar days of any receipt of any complaint against the towing company.
Sure.
That will be investigated. It is at the bottom there that it shall be brought to the attention of the parking department within 7 days as
Great.
well. And all charges, fees, the change of the chief of police to the parking department. Oops, my computer just jumped.
Okay, I think that's the end of
That's
section
the end?
6.
Okay.
Yep.
So, like I said, we could do more, but that's probably about it for the evening.
We still have a couple more items we need to cover on tonight's agenda, but it looks like we'll probably finish this up next month.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that
okay.
should be a reasonable. And if I can just like quick say, address part of the public comment in the reasonable rates for parking. In 5 to 6 years ago, council did vote to, there was an issue for some people that were working in town that did want cheaper options because they were working in town. At that time, we did implement the LPP, and that is currently still available. 6 years ago when that happened, that was $65 or $35 a month. That is still currently $35 a month, no matter what the rates have changed to. That has stayed the same. So I just did some quick basic math. Hopefully my math is right, but that's just saying if you work 20 hours a week, so then you're talking it's 80 hours a month, and it's $35, you're paying 44 cents per hour to park.
Yep.
So I just wanted to let people know that. And then actually, this year in January, you voted for the quarterly option, which actually gives you an additional discount. So I didn't figure out the math for that, but that would save even more. Those options are on the website and listed under LPP and all the locations.
Great. Thanks for bringing that up. All right. Thank you. Anybody have any last minute notes on that before we move on? Good. All right. Thank you. The next item on tonight's agenda is going to be the Gateway Connectivity Project design elements, and Ms. Sellers is going to help us with that. Yeah, please.
Okay, so we are continuing on our journey on the Gateway Connectivity project. So tonight we're talking about Lincoln Square. So the issues at hand that came out of the public meetings and certainly out of the master plan that was started in 2018.
Most people don't realize the actual size of the parking lot, and as a result...
Thanks, John. Good. essentially, we're looking for, and I am speaking here on behalf of Charles, on behalf of Chad, and, you know, I'm kind of wearing my other hat tonight, so thank you for indulging me. But they need council's direction, similar to what you were looking at the Southern Gateway at the last work session, and then the center of Baltimore Street. So now we're on to Lincoln Square. So as we address those things with the public meetings that we had and over the master plan process, most recently it was discussed that the issues that were most of interest to the public was ADA compliance, you know, safety with sidewalks and crosswalks, deliveries, bus loading and unloading of that nature on the square, and events and security. So
John, could you pull up the file labeled Square at Night?
There we go. Yeah.
Thank you. So this is the artist's rendering of the redesigned and reimagined square through. Talk over me at any time. I'm just yammering. Through the discussions we've had with PennDOT, it's become clear that we're not going to be able to retain the back out parking spaces on the square. This project, I mean, we're going to have to tear up the square no matter what we do, because there is infrastructure there that is decades old and desperately in need of repair. And just so everybody's clear, this is a project that's probably still 5 to 10 years away, right? I mean, we're not close.
We do not have construction funding. That is correct.
No. No, like there's a lot of, you know, hoops you have to jump through before you can even apply for construction funding. One of those is to have a design. So that's the process we're going through right now. We've had a series of public meetings where the members of the public were invited to come and to help the engineers and civil engineers, PennDOT engineers, our borough engineers, come up with different concepts for how these spaces could be better utilized. So it's a little hard to see up on the screen there, but essentially, given that we're not allowed to retain the backing out parking where you are just really trusting that you're not going to back into oncoming traffic, if we eliminate that, it opens up a lot more physical space for human bodies as opposed to cars, right? We have many, many aspects of our ordinance and our urban planning and our sort of vestigial systems here in the borough that are left over from, the 1950s when the borough was radically redesigned for car traffic as opposed to, I don't know, horses or whatever. And we started seeing parking lots and parking cropping up in much higher concentrations. The square became massively utilized as a place to store vehicles. We've talked about this before. The Musselman Library has this great set of historic photos that go back all the way to like 1810 that show these multiple iterations of the diamond, the square, the circle, and all of these different uses that this used to have. At one point, the courthouse was right in the middle of this. And there was no vehicle traffic at that time, right? So if we remove the on-street parking, and remember that one of the express goals of the Baltimore Street Revitalization Project, as well as the feedback we've gotten from many of the people in the community, is traffic calming, pedestrian access, ADA accessibility, but then also expansion of the way the square has come to be used over the last 10 years as a gathering place, as the town square. We can start to see the potential for different uses of this shared space. So these different artist renderings, there's sort of rectangles on each quadrant. That is a sort of a flexible space that could be used for bus loading and unloading, truck loading and unloading, ADA access, any number of temporary uses throughout the day or evening. But but then we start to see the other things too, right? We start to see traffic moved through calming intersections. We start to see parking moved to the radial arms and off the square itself, while we would still be retaining a pretty ample supply of ADA parking within proximity to the square. But we see way, way, way more space for people to gather. There's tables, there's lighting. One of the engineers, they've talked about the southwest quadrant there where we see all those colored lights. Currently, we are using that quadrant as a performance space. So the proposal has this as a permanent performance space with an elevated stage. The circle of pavers you see that goes around the entire square that creates the pedestrian space as opposed to the sitting space is also a channel for us to move the audio from that performance space all around the square. We can have lighting all around the square. The performances can fill the square. We can have expanded seating for restaurants and for events, special events, any number of considerations. So that's where the current designs have landed. If you look at the circle itself in the very center, it's the same footprint as it is currently today, although the sharp curbs would be replaced with something that's more easily mountable, so vehicles could drive over it without damaging it as they do now. And it is kind of hard to see in this too, but you do sort of see here, this is based on a photograph, an aerial photograph of the square. You can kind of see where there's stains on the asphalt that are made by, oil and tires that kind of show us where the traffic patterns actually are in the square. And I think that's a really interesting illustration here that the way that vehicles actually use the square currently is not impacted by this changed design.
Correct.
What am I missing here?
That's a very good point. So the square, as far as vehicle traffic, remains exactly the same. So it's obviously a state route. We can't impact what can be passable there. So yes, you're right. So the tire stains you're seeing, you're not losing any of that. What you're gaining is about 40% of people space for pedestrians, gatherings. We've certainly recently seen the exercise of the First Amendment, heavily in Lincoln Square. And to great concern, really, for safety. And this design project would really take those event and security measures into consideration as we talk about how we prepare this space for it to be utilized for more people space, whether it's celebrating or exercising your constitutional rights, but whatever might be happening downtown, or whether you're just downtown with a family. So. I think Matt stated it very well that, underneath the infrastructure is failing. So this is due for an overhaul. So we may as well do it from the bottom all the way to the top. And I know there's major concerns about losing parking on the square. But I think this is a time for a renaissance, probably like there was in the 1950s when you saw cars coming into prominence and use. And we're changing the way we do things. We're certainly not getting rid of cars anytime soon, but I think we're changing the way we use them, and we're going to have to look at, Main Street's already looking at different, parking alternatives and strategies. We have parking in the borough. We just have to make sure that it's, available and is certainly well marked and delineated in a way that that people and businesses can feel like they're being supported.
All right, thoughts, reflections, reactions. I love it. I hate it. This is terrible.
I think it's important to be clear that this was something, at least from what you just mentioned, Matt, that, PennDOT, having looked at this, saw that, the traffic backing out into, or the cars backing out into traffic was a safety concern. I think from what I've been seeing and hearing from some people is that the borough's just looking to change downtown and and almost do something nefarious with it. I don't know. I sort of like the some of the attitude that I've heard about the changes being made, but to be clear, there is a safety concern, and of course the addition of the space and the design that I see here, I think will have a great impact on the businesses downtown, a positive impact on the businesses downtown.
Agreed.
In my opinion.
I'd just offer that we really need to put on our visionary hats for this. This is not for us.
Right.
This is for next generations. This is us envisioning how we're going to leave this better than we found it, and more functional in a way that we are seeing new generations of people use outdoor space.
Yeah.
So, and we don't have construction funding, so we're not tearing it up too soon.
Right. Got some time.
Yeah, I think what I've heard from some of those businesses on the square is the concern about deliveries. So if this does map out a place for those to be able to happen or close by it on the radial arms, then that would, I'm sure, help with some of the concerns I've heard.
Absolutely. Those deliveries are happening right now with parking, which creates a serious safety concern. Not to mention an inconvenience concern. If you've ever been boxed in on the southeast quad by a Yingling truck, you're not going anywhere for a while. So those deliveries and bus loading and unloading for the David Wills house, certainly working with the hotel and how that's going to work, but working with the Blue and Gray is the only business that doesn't have alley access for their deliveries. This would really create a space that would be useful for that capacity, and still talking about ADA parking, so that we can make sure that, the people that are in most need of convenient parking have those options for them.
Yeah.
Could any residents or anyone, doesn't matter, pull up into those spots for pickup and drop off?
I think that would be a Borough Council directive.
I mean, we would have to set parking rules.
Right, you'd have to set rules for it, but yeah. Loading, unloading, I mean, and hopefully nobody abuses it, but that never happens, right?
So does everybody feel like this is on the right track? Is this where we would like to see our design team keep concentrating their efforts?
Yes.
My question is, I remember at the community meeting, there was talk of at least one quadrant being open for parking, partly for ADA, for people with disabilities, if I can remember those discussions.
Yeah, so you can barely see the paler rectangles on each of the 4 quadrants. That's where loading and unloading would happen for deliveries, buses, or could possibly be used for ADA. And then on each of the 4 radial arms, we see added parking that pushes out past where it currently is, and those spaces would be designated ADA.
So you'd gain a few, but you'd lose a few.
Have we run the numbers on what the financial impact would be on losing those spots?
I don't know. I don't know if we've done that math, but the fact is we're losing those spots.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
But we're going to pick up, 2 extra ones here on each side of the street, 2 there, 2 there, 2 there, 2 there. So we're losing some. I think it's 10 spaces we'd be losing. I don't know if you've run that math.
I have not run the math. I've seen this one other time, but I have not checked the spaces. And yes, we'd be losing some, but there's generally not every parking spot in the borough is full. The garage is very underutilized, so that you may be losing those spaces, but you're not losing parking in general. So those people will go to another location. Also, the first blocks are all the same price as the square is. So as long as somebody's parking in the first blocks, it'd still be the same price as the square would be.
Yeah. Patty has been having trouble with her audio since we added the second person on the spider phone that we don't know how to use. So she's texting me. She's just giving me a thumbs up. She says that she thinks this design is on the right track in her opinion.
All
Okay. Well, I'm not hearing anybody say that they hate it. Okay.
Well, I just have one quick question, and I think Peter sort of alluded to this. Have we gotten input from the businesses that would, I guess, see the greatest impact, whether positive or negative?
The public meetings that we held in April were
Mhm.
heavily attended by the businesses downtown.
Mhm.
So yes, their input is definitely part of this discussion and
Thank
part
you.
of the design plan.
Mhm.
We can't please everybody.
I know.
You know that's very true.
Sure.
So I appreciate the feedback on this. I'll
Mhm.
certainly share it with the borough engineer, and I'm sure he'll watch this recording. And I do want to address Brian and say, Brian, you have me as a point of contact, and I'm happy to talk to you about the Southern Gateway and what's going on there, and reiterate to council and to the public that this process has been going on since 2018. There have been numerous public meetings, and we are now finally in the design stage, which is going to take about 2 years. So your guidance at this point, gets that ball rolling even further. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
All right.
Could I just ask our OIC, Sergeant Evans, if you see any security details or things that pop out to you?
I mean, more people, more problems. I mean, you're going to have more pedestrian traffic. It's going to be, you get more people walking across the street. You're going to have distraction for the drivers. The more people you have out there, the more festivals you have, the more distractions you're going to have. I mean, as long as we, are staffed appropriately and we have the proper signage, then I don't really see an issue.
It's a really interesting question. And when Wes Heiser was here, he often would speak for the fire department, and there's more than one first response, right? And his big concern was that this is pushing the curb line so much further out from this very closely tight built environment, and he wanted to make sure that fire apparatus would still have access to these buildings, and that's one of the reasons why these have all been designed with those mountable curbs so that fire trucks could drive up onto the sidewalks as necessary. At one point in the design, we talked about using removable bollards to, posts that set into the ground and are locked in place to protect pedestrians from traffic. But then, if they need to be removed for an ambulance or for a fire truck, they can easily be unlocked and pulled out as necessary. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Jill. Thanks, everybody. The last thing on the agenda tonight is our discussion on the comprehensive rezoning. Mr. Whitmore.
Good evening. This is going to be a process going through phase 3. We'll be having a series of meetings with council. Our hope is to have Troy Truax, the representative with Michael Baker International, at the next workshop meeting in July. We're still getting that confirmed. Otherwise, he'll be meeting with council in August. Overall, the process we want to use for tonight is just to go over the introduction, part 1, the general provisions of the ordinance, which provide the broad overview of the document, and then also the zoning map. In particular, just the handout that's been provided, just going through the changes that have occurred in the drafting of this document, from the current map to what I've coined the 2024 draft, which was the completion of the steering working group, and then the May 5th, 2025 Planning Commission draft. We are looking at possibly having 2 meetings in August, just to expedite the process. The second meeting would involve meeting most likely with the Planning Commission. We can establish if we would do that at the Planning Commission meeting in August. We can have an update for you at by the next Borough Council meeting. So to get into the general zoning provisions, everyone loves a slide with way too much text and no pictures. The purpose of the ordinance, zoning itself, is land use regulation. It's the borough's ability to determine how property is used. for the past, going on 100 years now, with the Model Acts, the idea is you have a comprehensive plan. It's your vision for how you would like the borough to be in the future. The way you effectuate that change is with the zoning ordinance. The comprehensive plan drives the ordinance, or at least that's how it's supposed to work with regards to general practice and as the municipality's planning code for Pennsylvania establishes. So we have these general zoning provisions. Like I said, there's a lot of text here. I kind of like to boil it down a little easier. Generally, it's going to be promoting your police powers, so it's benefit to the Borough of Gettysburg. The whole idea of zoning is you keep like uses together. That creates what's called an agglomeration or a cluster. We know that that does have heightened economic activity as a result of that. It was what we term optimization of land. It's such that it's being used as economically beneficially as possible. We also are mindful that we're looking at this through the context of the Borough of Gettysburg as a municipal corporation. You all have to ensure that there's sustainability and durability not only in your individual finances for the general fund and other related funds, but also just the ability for this complex adaptive system that is the Borough of Gettysburg to maintain itself and be orderly developed. So yeah, you have promoting benefits for the borough, avoiding traffic congestion and unsafe buildings and landscape, providing for the use of land in all types of residential housing. That's a specific point that we'll get to in a little bit. And then to accommodate changes in land use, so to allow for there to be a method to actually change how land is planned to be used by way of provisions in the ordinance. The municipality's planning code really dictates how the borough is to go about this process and establishes the crux of the zoning ordinance. The Department of Community and Economic Development has provided a series of literature and pieces on just general planning, but when it comes to zoning, it gets really complex really quickly because we also have the added fun of having a case law that dictates certain things that the borough must do. In looking at the ordinance, we really did not try to go out to make massive changes to this document. So all these community development objectives, with the exception of 3 on the next slide, are just carryovers from the current code. And they get back to the same things that were already mentioned. It's providing for improved quality of life and establishing methods to protect land and establish how it will be used. The 3, to create opportunities for centrally located activity centers that would be available to both visitors and residents, potentially encourage interaction. To provide for meaningful and well-paying employment opportunities within the borough by including adequate land area districts and uses within those districts, and to protect and maintain resources and amenities that benefit the residents and visitors to our historic town. Those were added by the Planning Commission. Staff doesn't have an objection to them, but it was just those are the only additions to this entire part as it relates to the ordinance update process. Other key points of the first part, we have zoning permits. This is a method by which individuals are permitted to modify their land in some manner, establishing that changes to the landscape are in keeping with the comprehensive plan by way of a zoning ordinance. It also establishes an appeal process, and this is why you have a zoning hearing board. It creates the basis for the zoning hearing board and appeals. It also enables variances and special exception use provisions. There are some provisions that are required to be reviewed by Borough Council. We don't utilize the conditional use process, which would have the appeals run through council, instead utilizing the special exception process. As such, the zoning hearing board acts as a quasi-judicial body. They have the equivalency of a lower level magisterial level court. They're opinions, you would have a decision from that organization. If you're appealing, you go to the equivalent circuit court. With the idea being that it's being reviewed for the ministerial action of the review and ensuring that it's in keeping with the municipality's planning code provisions. So that's all just to say part one really sets up the basis for what the document is, how it can be used, and then it establishes that zoning hearing board. Typically, zoning hearing boards are limited to zoning ordinance. We don't have a SALDO, subdivision and land development ordinance review board. That may be something we get into later on when we get to a revised SALDO. But as it is, it really would be something that having either that board or a similar appeal board as opposed to the Planning Commission reviewing subdivisions is something to potentially investigate. And now, before everyone starts going to sleep, we'll bring out some pretty colors. Draft zoning map. The current draft map established on May 5th provides some relatively large changes from what's currently in existence. In the drafting process, the real crux was to have a document that encourages residential housing development. One of the changes that occurred, we went through some processes regarding industrial lands, investigated area along Carlisle Street that eventually became the NC4 Carlisle Street Neighborhood Commercial District. As those properties are very unique in historic character, but also in ownership and use, and in making sure that as a transition to our residential areas that they are maintained. It would be one of the, I guess, an area that would be prone to commercial expansion that could be problematic for residential uses. One of the things we realized in this planning process is that the residential communities, especially those subdivisions that are single-family detached dwellings, there's a real desire and want to maintain that aesthetic and ensure that properties are being utilized for residential purposes as opposed to having potential overcrowding scenarios with college students that are living in a household as an economic unit as opposed to an actual household or family unit. Changes to the ordinance, we had some minor updates to some parcels to ensure that are located on Steinware through this process, as they are currently or are anticipated to be in a state of open space. Additionally, we had a substantial discussion regarding properties located around the Old Town District, and we'll get to that. I think just to go through the Carlisle Street again, though, currently the current map uses terms that in districts that are not maintained. We'll get into that in the future months about how the changes came about to establish those neighborhood commercial districts. But this is just to show that there is the general location that establishes the NC4 district. In 2024, that draft, you'll see that these properties are zoned the yellow color. That's R2. The NC4 district follows the basis of the R2 district, but allows for certain commercial activities. Once we talk about the land use, the land uses table, we can have a good discussion about if the NC4 district makes sense as it's proposed, or if there are changes or modifications to the R2 district that would be more pertinent. One of the concerns throughout the entire Planning Commission review, we received numerous instances of property owners seeking either to have their property upzoned or to allow for increased uses in the zoning districts that the properties are located. Historically, this seems to have been, especially with properties along Middle Street, an issue that's been brought up with each rezoning. But In reviewing the document, staff tried to make sure that the Planning Commission was understanding of the steering committee's work to ensure that increased housing opportunities. As it relates to the Elm Street district and the Old Town district, this is where we have run into quite a few substantial changes, but those are as a result of the Elm Street district being successful. One of the problems we run into from an urban economic standpoint is that when you have a commercial business, it's going to command a higher rent than a residential property. Especially if it comes into something of an office type use or something that would be able for a property owner to be able to have increased rent. So what we have found in the borough is that as a result of those increased business opportunities, especially as they relate to the current Old Town district, where you're allowed to do pretty much any type of non-automotive based business activity, we have structures that otherwise would have been a single family dwelling or some sort of residential configuration converted into either office space, professional office space, or some sort of commercial based business. The current draft eliminates the Elm Street overlay district as a zoning tool. It doesn't eliminate the district, it just makes sure it makes it so it's not a provision or a zoning district. Instead, what's occurred is that the Old Town district is proposed to be shrunk very substantially. Around the district there would be this pink color is the NC 1. That's your neighborhood commercial. It would allow for some commercial activities, especially in smaller scale commercial activities, not necessarily full retail, but there are opportunities for just general commercial, general medical, things like that. The yellow then is the R2 district where you can have your residential activities occurring. As you'll see, we didn't make any real substantial changes from 2024 to 2025 in this area. There were some individual parcels that were evaluated. There was a large and substantial discussion regarding West Middle Street. As a result of that process, the map as proposed does have some properties that are currently being utilized as commercial activities. So like the ACMB, there's a realty office, a memorial company. Those are zoned R2. There's a church that is zoned R2. Many of these businesses had sought a higher zoning classification, and it was recommended by the Planning Commission to not proceed with that higher use and keeping it in R2, keeping it in more residential neighborhood design. And then finally, going back to the Steinware Avenue, this area, the big changes that are occurring. We're moving away from this green area was called tourism commercial. We've kind of shifted that into an understanding of more of a corridor basis, realization that the Steinware Avenue is more auto dependent, this red area being general commercial. It allows for uses that may have parking. One of the unique aspects of the current draft of the Planning Commission draft is that it does move away from parking minimums, so it's parking maximums now. There is a process by which a developer may seek to have increased parking, but they would have to be able to have a traffic impact study or some other type of research indicating the necessity, and then receiving a special exception for the increased parking. Otherwise, you'll see that most of the properties that were in this TC, especially on Baltimore Street, they've since changed to the stripy color, and that red stripy color is our NC2. It's a district specifically designed for Baltimore Street. One of the challenges we've run into with Baltimore Street is that while it's a commercial corridor connecting our downtown to the Steinware Avenue, most of the ordinance language appeared, at least the current language, really appeared to try to attempt to make that area residential. which there was one provision where we've had a lot of difficulty with some business interests as the ordinance requires a minimum lot area of about 5,000 square feet to have a business in that district, or at least a new business. The problem being that most of the parcels along that corridor are at about 4,000 square feet. So it's not really a practical application, especially when we're seeing that the mix of uses on that corridor is a benefit to the borough as a whole. So very quick overview of the zoning map to say that yes, there were changes made. Most of them involved individual parcels. We did have a few property owners in the process who had expressed concern with those zoning districts. Some wanted, most all wanted to have them increased or have the ability to do those extra commercial uses, mostly commercial and lodging uses. We did have one situation where a property owner asked to be downzoned. That was on, we have a zoning district called the R1A. It's basically a single-family district that allows for Airbnbs. The community in that case was concerned about the one property that had been zoned R1A, and the property owner themselves had asked for it to be brought back into the lower density R1, so that change was made. But then otherwise, yes, it is mostly the large-scale problems, I would say. When I say problems, the discussion, I mean discussion that the Planning Commission worked through involved that Middle Street corridor, the Elm Street changes, and then the NC4 area. So at this time, I can answer any questions. I know it's a lot of information. I do apologize because this is going to be a lot of information. We will be putting this material on the website. We have a rezoning page. Welcome everyone to continue to look at the document. If you find any problems, please let us know. I mean, I've looked at it hundreds of times, and even today I found another typo. So it's one of those things where I can't see all of it, and I don't wear these for fashion. So sometimes we do need to see. I do need a little bit of community support for that. But if there are instances where you have specific questions on changes to land uses, changes to definitions, we'll be going into most of those things in the coming months. But we can also address those individually now or via email.
So when next week we need to talk about this, what are we going to be tackling?
So Troy will be going over the phase one, how the steering committee, how that group was able to come up with the document, establishing specifically the NC districts, looking at just what was proposed from the steering committee. Additionally, we'll have material available related to the changes in definitions that were made. There were minor changes made with the exception of the family, which was relatively substantial. And then for that, in that July meeting. So then, and when we're looking at August, that's when we'll be discussing the districts, the use table, and having a conversation with Planning Commission as it relates to any council concerns with the changes made from the steering committee. We did have substantial changes made to the revitalization district. There were unique changes made when establishing the NC4 district, so those things can be addressed in those August meetings.
Great. Okay, so I'd like members to study these maps. The digital versions are going to be a little bit easier to get into the weeds on. You can blow them up much bigger and see the detail a little bit better than the printed versions. It's helpful to kind of see them side by side. Do we still have the slidey tool somewhere?
We do not. I can reach out to Troy to see if we can have that. We have to have it reanimated, but that shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, if it's helpful.
Yeah.
If you can do it, cool. Troy will largely lead this conversation next time, but I do want members to just kind of think about the timetable that we've sort of self-imposed here. This is a legislative priority we have set for the year, but having received this as late in the year as we did, We are going to be in budget season very quickly. August, September is when we start talking budget. So it is possible we may need to set additional workshops this summer in order to cover all of this material thoroughly. In the meantime, I know you've got it all in your folders. Keep reading. I know it's a lot, but we need to be as well versed in this material as possible so that we can be thoughtful when we get to deliberation over the final draft of the ordinance. Is there any questions or concerns?
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Planning Commission and John and commend a great process. And I do want to encourage my council members to watch the Planning Commission meetings that are on community media. It's very great that you had private investment that allowed that to happen. And I've just spent a lot of time watching the past week or two. And there's a lot of reading, but watching those meetings, you can get a lot from them.
Yep.
And when budget season does come up again, I'm going to encourage us to think about funding at the Planning Commission, because I know watching those meetings could really help me make my decision. And I know if I was a citizen in town, especially planning that just affects everybody, it's important for us to do that. So thanks to the Planning Commission. I look forward. We are going to be bringing them into our meetings. Did I see that, John? That we can have collaboration with like a joint sort of.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I had one question about if just like the grandfathering process as these zones change, if it was, for example, like a mixed use commercial space, and then, that's not allowed under the new zoning, that's what grandfathered in for, or not grandfathered in?
So non-conforming provisions are provided in the ordinance. You generally have three types of nonconformities. You'll have a parcel that no longer meets the zoning district requirements. It maybe doesn't have enough frontage, it may not be big enough, things like that. Non-conforming structures, that's a building then that may have deficiencies with setback, it may be too large, it may not be large enough. Then there's the non-conformities with land use. And that's where you have a situation, a good example is 100 Buford Avenue. It's a residentially zoned parcel that has what was probably designed as I would say a mini mart type building. That's where you have the Republican offices. They're there. There was a dog groomer there. We recently had a case involving a request for a convenience store at that location. And it is zoned R1. So the goal of the zoning ordinance is to have that uses being the same. As a professional planner, I really try to recommend against utilizing zoning to change property. It's messy and it generally doesn't work. You have situations then where you have nonconformities, which can take forever, literally, to change. The only way that's ever really guaranteed to change nonconformity is a casualty event. So you'll have like a fire, lightning strike, tornado, something that destroys the structure beyond 50% salvageable. And I believe 50% is the language that we utilize to establish that you can't reconstruct in that case to the same standard. It has to comply with the ordinance. When it comes to land uses that are not conforming, we get into really gray areas as it relates to how many people are living in a house, how many of those individuals are unrelated. We may have situations where a retail use may have been permitted. It may then change to a different type of use. We see that with things like involving commercial sales. It can get really tricky when we start broadening our definitions. And the whole point is, once again, to get to that conformity where if there's something that's happening that's outside of the norm with regards to the ordinance, the idea is that eventually it will be in conformity. If that's not able to happen, there are ways that council could enable what's called amateurization. That gets really complicated when you end up having to pay people or fine them, either way. Carrot stick approach to getting them to forcefully change how the property is used. That's something that we're not looking at. What we're being mindful of is that there are situations now where, because of the current ordinance, you have businesses and other legal uses which are crowding out residential opportunities. So with this ordinance, it's really encouraging commercial in areas that already have commercial, but also trying to widen those residential opportunities. So there will be situations where you'll have non-conforming businesses in residential areas. The goal, we've really looked into this, is really on the granular parcel by parcel level. Is it something that is so non-conforming that doesn't work for the community? And I think the Planning Commission has presented a product now that is confident that this is the best use of the land that's within the borough.
Thank you.
That said, I was going to say, from a legal perspective, it's very clear that if something is an existing legal use, you cannot, by ordinance, make it illegal. I mean, essentially, that's why John gave the outline regarding non-conforming uses and so forth. The law requires that those uses be allowed to go forward and actually expand in certain circumstances and so forth. So, I mean, you can't actually zone something or make it an illegal use. It has to be allowed to continue. So.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Whitmore? All right, we will continue this conversation in 4 weeks. All right. That is going to take us to our second public comment section of the evening. This section is not restricted in terms of content. You can speak about any subject you like. Please use the podium. State your name and address of residence. Please limit yourself to 5 minutes.
Thomas Pauls, 26 Highland View Lane, Gettysburg, and I will try to keep this well under 5 minutes if I can. I'd like to discuss a little bit about the historic district provisions and offer again some comments for your consideration. I want to offer also a little quick background, very quick background of what I have done in my planning career. I started in 1980 as a planner in the city of Frederick and became the director of planning there for 3 years, from 1980 to 83. Went to Fairfax County, then was a small fish in a big pond. Worked there from 1983 to 88, Virginia Beach, 1988 to 2010. Down to Florida, Deltona, 2010 to 2016. And then in 2022, I worked for a town, Mount Dora. The reason I mention this is because Frederick has a very robust historic district, and I think it's fairly successful. And as staff to that Historic District Commission, I learned a lot about the fundamentals of that. While the other jurisdictions that I mentioned didn't have that much in the way of historic preservation, one did, and that's Mount Dora, Florida. It's a lot like Gettysburg, 12,000 people, and they had a building height question presented to them because a developer wanted to put in a parking deck. The mayoral race pivoted on that issue, and the mayor that was incumbent lost, the new one won. And her position was, let's find a way to create a compromise to make this thing work. I was on a committee of 13 people, and as the person who had the most planning background at that time, I drafted the Land Development Code section, and what we did is we tried to find a balance between the need for economic development and the importance of preserving the historic area of Mount Dora. So from that perspective, I'm offering some of these comments here in that I've been down that road a little bit, and I feel like I know a little bit about it, but I'm hoping that we can find that compromise here. On section 11-102, under purposes of the historic district, one idea and a suggestion might be along these lines, and by the way, I'm going to provide to Sarah the document that I have here so she can have that and provide that to you if you wish. The purpose and intent of the historic districts are to advance the cultural heritage, architectural uniqueness, economic vitality, environmental quality, and general historic character of the Borough of Gettysburg, consistent with preserving the stability of adjoining residential neighborhoods. So as you can see, there's this balance of trying to create the need and the appropriateness of economic growth, but at the same time recognizing the historic value and trying to preserve that as well. And that balance to me is critical. So if you don't have that, I think you're going to run into a lot of disruptive factors that are going to make the job a whole lot more difficult in the long haul. There are a number of provisions already in section 11-102 that advance that. For example, number 1 says to safeguard Gettysburg's historic identity as it is represented in structures, streetscapes, and sites of historic, architectural, and archaeological value within the historic district. Number 4, to strengthen the borough's economy through recognition that visitors are interested in the historic Gettysburg historic buildings and streetscapes as part of the context of the Gettysburg National Military Park. I would also add, it's not just visitors that are interested. One of the reasons my wife and I decided to move into this area from Florida was because of the town of Gettysburg and the image that it has and the beauty and the recollection. I mean, my wife and I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, so we're fairly familiar. I skied Liberty Mountain back in 1967 when it was called Charnita. So I want you to understand, I do have an appreciation for this area, and I have a fond appreciation of that. Number 7 says, to ensure the size, scale, and design of new construction within the historic district is in harmony with the old. So again, that's part of what we're trying to get at here. On matters to be considered by the board in reviewing applications in section 11.110, it says, and I would suggest to say that we should ensure that the effect of the proposed physical changes will reinforce and not detract from the general historic and architectural nature of this district. And the language that's in there right now, I don't think directs the issue toward the structure that's being considered or the use or the physical presence of what's being proposed. It's a different context. So what this would do is focus on that whatever physical proposal is coming up and try to make that work. Finally, and I say this because we already have in my estimation 11.102 the guidelines needed for historic preservation. So under section 11.110 E and F, where it says contemporary design for additions to existing buildings that differentiate between old and new parts shall not be discouraged when such additions do not destroy significant historic architectural and cultural materials, and such design is compatible with the size, scale, color, material, aesthetics, and character of the building. First of all, the word destroy is rather significant.
I'm going to ask you to conclude here.
Okay,
Your
I will
time
conclude,
is up.
yes.
Yep.
So perhaps that could be struck. And I'm suggesting maybe because we already have language that does support the historic character of this area, that we strike the next section 2, which is contemporary design for new buildings shall be encouraged provided the design is compatible with existing neighborhood structures in scale, color, size, and building materials and other considerations listed in 1C of this section. Again, in closing, I would like to suggest that we focus on the historic character, don't necessarily eliminate the possibility of creative design, but whatever the design is, reinforces the prevailing historic worth of Gettysburg. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Set a timer, 5 minutes. I don't think I'll need that much time. So Jenna Pulowski, she is a therapist that has a office at 123 Baltimore Street. She could not be here tonight. The major concern that she had, especially with the parking, was that it cost over $2 for an hour there. So I was wondering if there could be reconsideration for businesses that have repeat customers that come for like an hour a week or so that it makes it more convenient for them to come to downtown or park in front of the office, because sometimes they have to park a few blocks away. So that was the thing that she wanted to mention that she could not be here tonight for. The other thing I wanted to mention, when I did receive the parking ticket, I didn't have a telephone number or an email to contact. I had to finagle the website and trying to figure out where I could find to request a review on the ticket. So in the future to have that so that people can see it on the ticket that's printed out to them. So if they wanted to refute it, they could. So I think that would be something that would be considered. So those are the 2 points I just wanted to make. So I appreciate the help, and thanks for everyone being here.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Mm-hmm.
Jill Sellers, 83 Mead Drive, speaking as myself. I am from a law enforcement family. My father served as a deputy sheriff for 35 years. My late brother, actually retired at the top of the state of California law enforcement as an executive officer. Did not have a college education. He was the only one in the entire system. So as you take a look at qualifications for our next chief of police, there are diamonds in the rough out there that do amazing things without formal education. My brother and I butted heads about that a lot because he thought I was overeducated, and but anyway, I applaud you as you go down that road and take that into consideration, because it affects how our community functions, and certainly how the borough functions as a team. And I just wanted to chime in on that one particular aspect of it, because it's a whole list of considerations. So thank you for listening. Good night.
Yes, ma'am. Last call, public comment. All right, we will adjourn to executive session.